Alright, once again, another deck profile on a deck that I originally did a review on, but did have, just because every deck was probably going to look the same, although arguably since it was a start deck that could be played with a bunch of generics, every take was going to be a bit different, but now with some additional support, the deck did change up quite a bit, so I'm doing this review now. And I have to say, Estacion as a deck was pretty awesome, especially on release. I really love the concept of it being season dragons, basically the 4 seasons of every year, winter, spring, summer, and fall, which I actually find it very awesome, and especially the idea of a bunch of plant tokens that are dragons that are fusing all into one. So I did find this an awesome concept on release, and in a way it plays very similar to Granfia that I kind of end up playing the deck. I originally found Granfia very interesting, but never built the deck, but this is technically a second chance for me to build Granfia, but as a dragon. And I'm a sucker for dragons, so here I am playing this deck. And recently with set 12, we got some cool new support with 2 new weather dragons or season dragons, although not a whole set of all 4 weather dragons or season dragons, which is a little unfortunate, but still overall very good support. So we're going to go over this right now with, of course, starting with the ride deck. So here's the starter, Estacion, which you do have to run because it requires it with the grade 1, in which we go to the grade 1, where when the grade 2 Estacion rides on top of it, you can Soul Blast the regular Estacion and then Superior Call Blast token, in which we go to the Blast token itself. So Blast token has 3 unique abilities. The first one makes it basically have resist, but your opponent can still attack into it if they could attack the circle, so just keep that in mind. And then the second ability is unaffected by your opponent's cards, which is also very nice because this is very necessary, especially for this deck that this is the only way for you to get the tokens through the ride line. And then the third skill, which is one of the main ones, where once per turn you can put 2 to 3 rear cards into your gauge for this card. So kind of like the Granfia plant tokens, but you suck them all into this one card, and then you draw a card. This is going to build up for the last skill, where during your turn, if you have at least a grade 3 Vanguard, all your front row units gets with 5k power for every 2 gauges it has. So since you're calling this through a grade 1, you're going to have 0 tokens, but through extra skills, you're very likely going to have 2 to 3 tokens on your very first turn, and usually about 6 tokens once you hit grade 3, which will be explained why later, but continue on to the grade 2, where when you ride it on top of the grade 1, you search your deck for a Vital Blaze Blast, which is the order card, and put it to your hand. Basically, when you ride grade 2, grade 1 skill activates, and the grade 2 skill activates. So you call the blast token, and this one searches for the order card. And the order card is going to be very important for the deck, and that's one of the reasons why you're going to get the tokens. But I'll go over that later with the main deck, in which we go to the Legend of Celestial Fury, Estacion, which does have an evolved form showed up in the manga that still hasn't been printed yet. But anyway, it has a skill where if you have a blast token, act once per turn. If you would call plant token through an ability, you can put that plant token into the blast token. And this is going to be one of your ways to build up your blast token. And then you can counterblast 1, you call 1 plant token to rearguard, and then look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then choose a card from among them and put it to your hand. But if you have at least 6 plant tokens, which usually you would by then at grade 3, you can look at the top 5 instead. And the nice part about this search is that you don't need to reveal the card to your opponent. So you literally just look at top 5 and just put 1 card, whatever you want, to your hand. And that 1 extra plant token card is just very good just because it will of course be consistent with your blast token to suck more into its gauges. So that's why this search is already very good. But the next skill is the main part, where when this card attacks, you can discard 2 plant gauges from the blast token and then search your deck or drop some for 1 blast unit and call it to rearguard. And then of course if you did from deck, of course you shuffle it, thus giving you an extra attack. And there's another card that can give you another attack on top of it. So it's a multi-attack that cannot be counterblast denied, and it does plus you a lot and combos well with other cards, and with blast token, even more power. This itself doesn't gain power, but thanks to the blast token, the power is not much of an issue as you're just building up those gauges for the blast token. So there's really not much to explain here, it's just everything relies on its support. And then we continue off to the main deck. 3 more for Persona ride because Persona. And then to the main important card of the deck, or at least one of them, which is the order card, the Vital Blaze Blast, which is of course searchable through your grade 2. And because this is a grade 2 normal order, you can play on a grade 2 turn, which is also very vital. because you play it by Soul Blasting 1 while you have a blast token. You put this on the blast token as a gauge, and then look at top 5 cards of your deck to choose up to 1 unit card to call. But if you do not choose to call any of them, you call a plant token, which is of course very good because you get a plus regardless, and not only that, an extra plus just because you put another gauge. And because you put another gauge, certain abilities will activate. That's why you want to run 4 of this, not only just for the search, but also just so you can consistently play it, just so you can get your extra pluses. But it's also nice that when this card is put to the drop by using your plant gauge abilities, you can choose a blast unit and it gets plus 5k power. So that's also very nice, as it just basically gives you even more power just for basically soul blasting it from the gauge. And you're going to be doing this a lot because you can actually recycle from the drop zone thanks to one tech card I ran. But yeah, it's one of your most important cards of the deck, hence why you run 4. And then to one of the grade 3 weather dragons, so I run the Absolute Winter. Now, many people don't really run this, but personally I still like it because when you call it through card ability, it gets a crit +1, and that crit pressure does help on the early game, so that's why I kind of like it, especially when you call it through your Vital Blaze Blast from the top 5. It can be used as early attack crit pressure, that's why I just kind of like it, with the second ability where you can retire from rear guard or discard it from your hand at the beginning of battle, and then give the unit that is being attacked plus 10k power into the end of the battle. So basically it becomes a 10k shield as a grade 3, but this is not during the guard step and you don't put in a guardian, so that's a nice way to bypass guard restrict if you need it, but it's more so here for the crit pressure, especially on top of blast token, giving it some extra power. But you don't have to run it if you don't like it, but personally I still kind of like it. And then the tech card I decided to run is a Festival Collection card, Gwelwyn, because this one gets intercept and 5k shield, but that's not the important part. The important part is the auto when placed on rear guard while your Vanguard is at least grade 3, you can Energy Blast 3 to give it plus 5k power, and your opponent cannot intercept during the turn this card attacks. But if you have at least 4 damage or you persona it during the turn, you can have this card gain additional 5k power and then choose an order card from your draw zone and return it back to the hand. This is one of your ways to return your Vital Blaze Blast, and it's just a way to reuse it, and you're going to be soul gauging it out all the time. So that's why I decided to run this as a tech card, and it's just a good way to use energy as the deck doesn't really use energy, so that's why I like it. And so that's it for the grade 3 lineup. To the grade 2 lineup, to the main grade 2 from the start deck, the Autumn. So when placed on rearguard, while you have your Vanguard Estacion, you can call plant token. And yes, if you call this in battle, you can call a plant token. Hence why when your Estacion attacks, you can call this and then call plant token, thus giving you 2 more attacks instead of just the regular 1. And also in the drop zone, if you put a plant gauge during your main phase, you can counterblast 1 to call this to rearguard. And it's just another recovery option, discard fodder. And then plus, since you're calling this, you get another plant gauge with it. So there's just a lot of stuff you can do with this. It's just free stuff that you can do. That's why you just run 4, especially it's part of your multi-attack engine. And then finally to the last grade 2, which is actually the new grade 2 for the set, the Expansive Summer, which I took out the original Summer because that card wasn't great, as all it does is just paralyze one of your opponent's rear guards, and it's also a 15k attacker, 10k shield, so I don't really see much of a point, especially when this card kind of does the same thing. Because when this card attacks a Vanguard, if your Vanguard's at least a grade 3 Estacion, it gets plus 5k power, and at the end of battle, you can retire this unit to draw a card, although retire to draw a card is mandatory, so 15k attacker on its own already, with the second skill where, when put on Guardian, while you have a blast token, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, it gets its original power becomes 5,000. So you make your opponent's original power 5,000, which could actually be a big deal, especially on multi-attack rearguards, but also for the part where it can retire itself during battle, which does clear up your board, and then you can superior call that card on the open rearguard. That's why I decided to run this. So it's a good defense and offense option, and it's one of your better cards to run. That's why this card is just the good one to run right now, especially to clear up your board. And then to the grade 1 lineup, time to run the Sunny Spring. So this one is another energy waster because during your main phase, while your Vanguard's Estacion, and once per turn you can Energy Blast 3 to call plant token, and it's also a 10k attacker or booster while you have at least 6 gauges, which is of course pretty nice for making magic numbers, but you just mainly use it as an energy waster for more plant tokens, and the deck doesn't really use energy anyway, so that's why I run 2 of these. And then to a new card, which is a new Spring Joy. So this one looks like a dog dragon, and when discarded during your ride phase, you can call a plant token to rearguard while your Vanguard is Estacion. This is going to be essential, especially the minute you have the blast token. But the other skill is that while in the drop zone, if you have at least a grade 3 Vanguard Estacion, you can bind this card to call 2 plant tokens to rearguard, but you cannot buy another copy of this and use this skill for the same turn. So it's like the mushrooms, except on drop zone. It does kind of suck that it has to be only drop zone since you have to find ways to discard it, and sometimes you just don't get it. But luckily, it does have a useful last skill as well in the drop zone, because while your at least grade 3 Vanguard Estacion gets attacked, you can bind this to give it plus 10k power into the end of the battle, but you cannot buy another copy and use this skill for the rest of the turn. So hard once per turn, be a mushroom in the drop zone, and hard once per turn, defensive card. That's why you just run 4 of, and it's also a discard fodder, so that's why it's just one of your best cards in the deck that you just have to run it, and more plant tokens the better, as it just means more power. And then speaking of mushrooms, 4 mushrooms, because mushrooms is one of the best cards that was ever released for any Stokeia deck when it comes to plant tokens, and technically it's generic for any Stokeia deck, even though it gives a bonus for Granfia, but it's just put to soul and call 2 plant tokens, and that works even on your grade 1 turn. But your Vanguard's Granfia, which is just ignore, plus 5k, but ignore that part, you just use it for the 2 plant tokens, so you can use your blast token to absorb them. And then finally to the last card, Harvest Elf, just another way to clear up your board. You can also Soul Blast 1 to call a plant token if you call it from hand during your turn. And in the back row, while your opponent's Vanguard's at grade 3, this card gives us 5k power, so it's a 10k boost. And then at the end of this unit boost, you can retire itself along with the boosted rearguard to give you a draw. Once again, I said, clear up another board. You don't have to run this if you don't have to, especially if you can't afford it, since this one is expensive. But it's a good card to basically clear up your board, more draw, and also it's a plant token related stuff, so that's why it's helpful. And then finally, 4 PGs, because PGs, run whatever you want. And then to the trigger lineup, OT, run whatever OT you like. A crit to kill your opponent as soon as you can. 3 draws, so you actually draw key pieces, because sometimes the deck does struggle with that. And finally, 4 heals, 2 being counters. And so that's it for this deck profile on my Estacion deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? And what other changes would you make? Overall, I am liking the deck as it is. I did go over a few changes here and there, especially with some ratios, but after playtesting it for a long time, I kind of like the deck as it is now. And especially, I am now excited for a new form of Estacion that was revealed in the manga that still hasn't been printed yet. Because Estacion was one of my favorite designed cards, especially since it has an interesting mechanic, even though it was taken from another deck, but with dragons. And I just love how the concept of a bunch of plants combining together turns into a full-on bird dragon. I just find it very awesome, especially with the idea of them being seasoned dragons. But other than that, the deck doesn't really change too much since its release. It just got a few upgrade of cards and just more consistency, and it still just plays the same. And overall, it's just an awesome deck. And definitely recommendable to budget players, just take out those expensive generics basically, because the cards itself is not really too expensive. And speaking of generics, this deck is very flexible with generics as well, if you really want to put those generics in. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.